Hello world, welcome back to Razor RC. Today we're doing a full review of the Arrma Kraton EXB. So this is a brand new 1/8 scale electric four-wheel drive truggy from Arrma. So the EXB is their extreme basher, so it comes as a roller kit and it's pretty much an update over their regular V4 Arrma Kraton 6S BLX. So it sells for $480 here in the United States. The regular RTR sells for $550 with electronics. So it's a little bit cheaper, but you do have to supply your own electronics. And for the most part, I think Arrma markets this as basically a heavy duty version of their regular V4 RTR. A little bit more cheaper price point, but you do have to provide your own electronics. And that way you can kind of configure it as you want. For me, I'm running a Spectrum SR3100 receiver in the receiver box paired to a Spectrum DX5C radio. I'm running a Power HD 23 kilogram servo. And then power plant wise, I'm basically running something very similar to the stock 6S RTR power plant. So this is a rebranded Hobbywing quick run WP8BL150. So it's a 150 amp 6S capable 8 scale sized ESC, and then motor wise I'm running something very similar to the stock motor. This is a Hobbystar 4076. I believe the stock motor is a 4074 millimeter motor, so slightly longer in length but about the same size. And it's a 1700 kV motor as opposed to a stock 2050 kV motor. So I went with something just slightly torquier. This is a heavier truck than the regular RTR version. I want something a little more grunt, low end torque, and hopefully it would run a little bit cooler. Other than that, it's pretty much all stock except for the exception of a RPM rear bumper here on the back. Just kind of saves the chassis a little bit because it does tend to get beat up there on the back of the vehicle as you hit jumps and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's what I've got on my particular kit. Now the Arrma Kraton is probably Arrma's most popular vehicle in their 6S lineup. And I can understand why. It's pretty much kind of the most flexible vehicle. A lot of people like to do this using it for speed runs, doing for super send it type things. It's not particularly designed for any one thing. Something like the Outcast is their stunt truck. Something like their Typhon is basically their 1/8 scale, sort of race buggy type thing, and something like Italian is kind of like their speed vehicles. But the Arrma Kraton is really easy to drive, probably the most popular vehicle because it is the most versatile. It's the longest and the widest vehicle in their lineup. So overall, yeah, pretty flexible. So I'm going to review this in a bunch of different categories as usual, from 1 to 5 stars, and it is graded on a curve. What I mean by that is it is graded as compared to other vehicles on the market today. So competitors, the Arrma Kraton EXB, are going to be things like the eRevo 2.0, the Team Corrali Kronos, the Red Cat Kaiju, which is again a 1/8 scale 6S capable RTR monster truck, a little bit smaller than this, but I would pretty much classify it in that same lineup. So this rating system is based as compared to other vehicles in this class. It's not compared to other 4S or 2S or whatever vehicles. It's compared against the competition, and so I'm going to rate it from 1 to 5 stars. 3 stars would be average, meaning it's kind of about the same as other vehicles out there on the market. 5 stars would be best in class, and 1 star would obviously be very, very poor. So first up is the build, and this is made in a factory in China along with, I'm sure, all the other Arrma vehicles. Overall, the build was pretty good. No real major issues. Everything was put together correctly. The diffs had fluid in them. The shocks had enough fluid in them. One note on the diffs: whenever you take apart the diffs, definitely make sure you let it sit for 5 minutes before you inspect the actual fluid level. A lot of people make that mistake, including me, thinking the diffs are only like a quarter full. Well, you gotta let it sit there and drain for about 5 minutes just to check the actual height. Sway bars were a little bit loose, not a big deal. I did notice that the turnbuckles are all nicely lined up. They're all the same, facing the same direction. So thank you, Arrma, for that. I might be the only person on the planet that noticed that the turnbuckles have always been different on previous Arrmas, but looks like they fixed that on my Kraton EXB. Now there is one major problem with this, and that is that the rear diff was missing some shims. It was not shimmed quite correctly. On the very first run, I did notice some clicking, basically some teeth skipping on the rear diff, so that was a problem. I did have to order some shims, and I have a video out there on how to do that, but definitely something you will want to check out if you pick up the Arrma Kraton EXB. You want to shim basically that those 2 pins on the actual out drives as tight as possible. Put as many shims underneath there as you can, and I think that will basically fix the problem. Now, the other issue I had was that the axles were missing, or not missing, but the grub screws that hold on the little pins on the axles were on like crazy tight. It seemed like they used like red Loctite or something. I actually had to heat them up with a lighter, and then you know, almost stripped one trying to back one out. So when you pick one of these things up, I do recommend, you know, basically just getting your high quality 2.5mm hex driver, maybe heating up the axle and removing those grub screws just to kind of break down that Loctite, because once you run it and once these things fill up with a little bit of dirt, it can be pretty difficult to get those things out. It's a lot easier to take them out, you know, when it's new. And you don't need to put a whole lot of force tightening those things down. I mean, all they're doing is holding that little pin in there. That's not a big deal. That thing cannot fly out, you know, as long as your wheel nuts are tightened. So it's not something that's going to fall off while you're driving, so they don't need to be super tight. So in the build category, I do like that they had the turnbuckles all facing. I did like everything was pretty much fine. No real issues, no stripped screws, no, you know, loose nuts or anything like that. So that was good. Now the downside, those grub screws are still on crazy tight. That was one of the complaints a lot of people have with the RTR version, is that they do use red Loctite throughout the vehicle. I understand why, because they, you know, they're trying to make these things sort of idiot proof, and so they don't want wheels to fall off or pinions to fall off or whatever while you're driving. So they do go a little, you know, overboard, I think, with the red Loctite, but you know, for something like this, I don't think they need that. So I'm gonna lose 1 star for that. And the other thing is that diff. I mean, if you're not really familiar with what's going on, if you're not on the Facebook groups or checking out the Arrma forums, you might not know that you need to make sure your diffs are shimmed correctly. So I'm actually going to give it -2 stars for that. I think this is probably a first run issue. I expect that they would fix that on the next run of these vehicles, but if you're picking this up now, definitely double check your rear diff and make sure it is shimmed as much as possible, because you don't want those gears skipping, and then, you know, that'd be a much more costly problem. So I am giving it -2 stars for that. Overall 2 stars. I do think it is a little bit below average, pretty much just for that rear diff issue, because it's not something you really want to run out of the box without double checking that first. So overall, 2 stars. Okay, next up is the design of the Arrma Kraton EXB, and this is my first Arrma 6S 8th scale, so I am kind of new to this and was just kind of checking things out. We'll kind of walk through the vehicle first of all. For those of you that don't know it, Arrma basically came out of Team Durango, which was a full-on race company. They did make race kits, and so you can kind of see that they carried over some of those adjustments and that DNA over into the Arrma lineup. So it is nice to see that there are actually a lot of adjustments on this. So we'll kind of go over what I see and then the improvements they made over the regular V4 RTR. So up front, you can see the super bash bumper, a lot bigger, a lot wider. I had no issues with that. That was actually really nice. It does provide a lot of protection up front. Now they did redesign the arms as well, top and bottom arms. I believe the rear arms as well. Thicker material, definitely feels super beefy, and I'm not sure if that was a big issue on the regular V4, but they did make some adjustments there. You got all aluminum shocks, including aluminum shock caps, a brand new shock tower. So this is a 7075 T6 aluminum. I think it's 5mm shock tower. So rather than the regular 60, what is it, 6065? I forgot what it's called. Aluminum. This is much beefier, much heavier duty. On the drive shafts, they're about the same, no changes there. The knuckles are pretty much the same. Axles, I don't think there's any change there. They did actually improve the turnbuckles, so these are these new silver colored 4mm turnbuckles, although you will need a 5mm wrench to actually adjust those. They did redesign the hinge pins, so heavy duty hinge pins up front and rear. And then sway bars, pretty much the same. I think they retuned them a little bit. They've got a softer sway bar in the rear, but the same design as before. And then the one big change is that they went to these LSD differentials. So front, center, and rear differentials are all brand new. They have 6mm out drives. They basically use some friction plates inside the diff, so that's what the LSD does. It basically adds additional resistance, additional friction, so you can basically run a heavier duty differential, basically with less slip, without having to run like super crazy oil. So that was pretty cool to see. They've got that in the front and the center. Rear diff is still what they call an open diff, but it does use those same gears, so you can actually add the LSD plates if you want. Going down the chassis, brand new servo mount, nice little aluminum ring gear or little mount there to hold the servo in place a little bit better. I believe the center brace is exactly the same. Now they did add aluminum chassis braces here, front and rear, so these kind of heavy duty chassis braces. The original ones are plastic, so these add just extra durability. And then the one really nice thing, the 7075 aluminum chassis, so big improvement in durability there. Yeah, so that's the center of the vehicle. I don't think any other changes to the receiver box or the battery straps or anything like that. They do have a nice little protective roll cage here in the middle, so when you land upside down, it does not smash up your body as much. Motor mount, same as before. A nice little feature here is that you can actually run a pretty large size cam motor, I think up to about 49 millimeters in diameter, and then, you know, I don't know, 100 millimeters or 140 millimeters, something super long if you want to run tons and tons of power. Nice little wire management system, and then ESC wise, you can barely squeeze in like a Max 6. You know, obviously it's designed for 8 scale ESCs, but you could actually fit in a 6 scale. They did redesign the sleeves on the drive shafts here in the middle, so they have these nice little plastic covers with a little set screw that holds them onto the actual pinion gears inside the differentials. Cool thing about this is you can even access this without removing the bulkhead. So if you just wanted to actually get to that input gear or that pinion gear inside the differential, you can basically just back out that screw, pull off the sleeve, and then you can actually pull off the input gear from the inside of the disc. So you don't have to like fully remove the bulkhead or anything. Nice little serviceability feature there. On the back end, brand new shock towers. They did retune the shocks a little bit. Also, the rear shocks are slightly different. They basically moved the shocks inward from the original position, which was probably like this outward position. So a little bit smaller shock tower. It is heavy duty, 70-75, slightly shorter shocks because obviously here in the back, they moved it in closer so you couldn't run the same shocks. Sway bar is slightly smaller than before. And the pistons were retuned. I believe they're 2 by 1.3 millimeter now in the back, down from 2 by 1.4 millimeters. Nice things I like to see on the back. You have roll center adjustment, both on the shock tower and out here on the hubs. Adjustable turnbuckles for that camber. And then the drive shafts, I believe, are the same. No changes there. Axles, no change there. But these rear arms are new. So yeah, that's pretty much an overview of the design. Super easy to work on. Very nice classical 1/8 scale design. Does use pillow balls up front, which I'm not a super big fan of, but you know, that's pretty typical within the 1/8 scale space. So overall, design wise, I'm going to give it 5 stars. Just easy to work on, a lot of adjustments, a lot of improvements as well, tons of durability built into this design. And the LSD differentials, you know, people have been having problems with that, especially the rear diff, but you know, overall I do like it because they are providing actually even more tunability options. So overall, big fan of this design overall, 5 stars. So what is the performance like of the Arrma Kraton? And so I took this out in a variety of different situations, all off-road of course, because this is an off-road vehicle, but you know, I did some backflips, did some sort of high-speed oval runs on like a baseball diamond, just general purpose bashing. Had like a little track I was doing doubles on and stuff like that. So just really wanted to understand how this thing drives, and by that I basically mean how does it accelerate, brake, steer, handle, should fly through the air, jump and land, all that stuff. So that's what I mean by performance. Overall performance was pretty good. I did notice that the chassis is extremely stiff. All this additional aluminum bracing and stuff. The chassis itself is a stiffer material. The shock tires, everything on this vehicle makes the chassis extremely stiff. There's no flex pretty much whatsoever. Now you may say, okay, that's a good thing, and I think they did that for durability reasons. Obviously, you know, they wanted to make this the strongest 6S vehicle out there, and but on the downsides, there are definitely trade-offs you make when you go with the super stiff chassis. So I did notice they did retune some things like the thinner rear sway bar, the different shock positions. and the different shock pistons as well. So basically designed this to kind of accommodate for that super stiff chassis and still make it drive well. I did make some changes. I did not like the way the front differential worked, because there was a ton of basically resistance in there to provide less slip. I think it drives a little bit better, a little more steering with some changes to that. I also changed out the wheels. Stock wheels and tires are these, the D-Boots Copperheads. I was not a huge fan of these. I mean, they're okay, but on loose dirt, which is what I was driving on, they did not work quite as well. I actually am currently running D-Boots backflips. So these are the LP version, slightly smaller, about a ½ inch narrow, and maybe a quarter, ½ inch smaller in diameter. So lighter, smaller wheels. Motor runs a lot cooler with that. But the main thing is, it's got all these sort of sharp edges that really dig into the dirt a lot better. Did find the performance of these to be quite improved. So I think the stock tires are okay, not particularly awesome. They're sort of a general purpose basher type thing. They got to be able to run on the street. They got to be running in the grass, on the dirt, all that kind of stuff. For what I like to do, I do think the backflips are a better tire. So overall in performance, it jumps pretty well. Does not do backflips like super fast, obviously, because it's got the longer chassis. Something like an Outcast would spin quite a bit quicker in the air. It does have the big tires, so it does help with the rotation and counter rotation. But to me, this is kind of an all-purpose vehicle. It's very easy to drive because it's so large. The wide wheelbase, the wide track width, basically helps it land, not really flip over very much. But on the downside, Trudges tend to not have quite the sharpest steering because they are so wide, as compared to probably Italian or a Typhon. So in the performance category, I'm going to give it an average score, 3 stars. I think it drives okay, but it does need some tuning. They basically built this as sort of something to be super durable, but I think they lost a little bit thing in the handling, in the tires, and so overall kind of an average score. I'm going to give it 3 stars. So the other big category in the basher segment is how durable is the Arrma Kraton EXB? And I think my answer may surprise you. So a couple of things I just want to clear up. First of all, this again is graded on a curve. If this thing breaks 5 out of 10 times, am I going to give it a good or a bad rating? Well, it kind of depends what the competition is. If the competition breaks 10 out of 10 times, then it's going to get a really good score. If the competition breaks 1 out of 10 times, then it's going to get a really poor score. So I think that's the only fair way to evaluate a vehicle. It's all relative to what else is out there on the market. And so in the durability category, I again am going to talk about that. Now, the other thing people want to know about, is it more durable than a V4? And I think the answer is obviously yes. I mean, everything they did here was basically address the V4 version of the Arrma Kraton, make it more durable, make it stiffer, use higher quality materials, add additional bracing, thicker arms, all that kind of stuff. So everything I've broken on this vehicle were not brand new parts. They were basically things that already pre-existed on the V4. But I did want to cover what I actually broke, and it is quite a few things. So starting up front, I broke a shock tower screw, basically landing it on its hood just directly into the face of a jump, just trying to do some backflips for some kids. Not a big deal, just had to replace the screw, but that did put me out of commission for about 10 minutes. I also broke a rod end here on the back of the vehicle on a pretty minor cartwheel, so I was pretty surprised that this turnbuckle rod end broke on a crash that honestly 9 out of 10 vehicles I think would have survived. So was kind of surprised with that. I did also break the front gearbox, so these screws actually here pulled out. I do recommend using longer screws. I think the stock screws are something like 10 or 12 millimeters. I think I'm running a 14 millimeter screw. Those did pull out, they did back out, so pretty much stripped out. I also cracked basically the gearbox here on the bottom, so I did have to fully replace this gearbox. And then some other things. So I bent a CVA in the front, I bent a dog bone in the rear. I did not actually replace those. I basically just hammered them back into place. So I did not actually buy new parts, but it did put me out of commission. And then finally, I changed out one of the upper rear arms. I did notice that one of them was getting like kind of flexible and actually bending a little too much, so I did replace the upper arm. Did not actually break, but I did feel like it was flexing a little too much. Last thing I did was actually replace one of the outdrives here on the front. I think partially because of that bent CVA, the outdrive was not fitting quite as well on the dog bone, and I did have issues with this dog bone popping out. So the dog bone popping out thing happened to me several times on just very minor jumps, you know, landing, I'm cleaning everything. I think it was a combination of that outdrive basically being damaged and that CVA being bent. I'm actually flipped them around just so it keeps that dog bone in there a little bit better. But that was kind of annoying. It did pop out several times. And the other thing I noticed is that my pillow balls were popping out of the steering knuckles here. So that happened on both sides, both the left side and the right side. One was on a pretty bad crash all the way on both side wheels here in the front and back, and the other one was basically off of like a side swipe off of like a wooden board basically. Both of those I was kind of surprised they pulled out, but I mean not really so much this side, but the other one I just, you know, I side swiped like a wooden board like I've done many times with other vehicles, and they did pop out. So they did not actually break. It looked like they were cracked, but you know, I've been running them ever since and they seem to be holding up. It is something you just have to pop back in place. So there are definitely things that put me out of commission for, you know, 5 or 10 minutes, you know, brought me back to my car having to repair things. And then there are other things that actually broke, like the shock screw, the outdrive that I basically had to replace, the gearbox, which did require actual new parts in addition to like the turnbuckle on the back. So that's an overview of everything I broke. You know, in general, I would say I've broken a lot more stuff on this vehicle than most of my other cars. And I also do think Truggies in general tend to be kind of the weakest design because they got the super long arms, puts a lot of leverage both on the wheel, tire, arms, and then also the CVAs and axles and stuff, because they are just super long drive shafts. They're a lot easier to bend. And then in addition to that, there's no protection. It's not like you have a short course truck with, you know, fully enclosed fenders and stuff like that, fully enclosed body. You know, everything's pretty much open on these. So all the vehicles I've broken the most stuff on have all been Truggies. So my Hobao Hyper 10 TT was probably my most fragile vehicle. I broke the most stuff on that. My Techno ET410, I broke a ton of stuff on that. Pretty much broke stuff every time I drove. And then this one, I also feel like I've broken or, you know, had to take it out of commission, you know, quite a bit of times for the amount of batteries I've driven. So, but once again, durability is rated as compared to the competition. So other things that we got are going to be the eRevo 2.0, which is a pretty fragile, you know, basically all plastic vehicle. A lot of people have problems with the tie rods and stuff, basically bending or breaking almost every time they run those. So I would rate this higher in durability than that. You also have the Red Cat Kaiju, which I've also tested. That thing has problems with the outdrives, front bumper, rear hubs, plastic spur gear. I do think that one is more fragile than this vehicle. And then you finally have the Team Corrale Kronos, which I have not driven, but you know, based on all the feedback I've seen, that again is a pretty fragile vehicle. So I know this is going to surprise people. I do think it is 4 stars. I do think it is better than competition, but in the grand scheme of things, not the most durable vehicle on the market. Next up, we have the support and maintenance category, and overall this vehicle is very, very easy to work on. The bulkhead can be a little bit of a pain, probably 20 screws or so to fully remove out that bulkhead, but overall the diffs are easy to access. The center diff is easy to access. The motor mount is, you know, 2 screws. You can slide that thing out. Easy to access the pinion. They have a little access screw here on the side. You can even get to the input gears by basically just removing those little grub screws here on the side of the plastic sleeves. Shocks are easy to access. So yeah, overall this is a pretty easy vehicle to work on. So the maintenance category, definitely very good. Now on the parts supply category, Arrma is owned by Horizon Hobby, which is one of the largest companies here in the United States. Not so much around the world, but definitely within the US, they are definitely one of the big brands. And Horizon Hobby customer service is very, very good. Certainly one of the better ones out there. I've worked with them several times in the past, getting things covered under warranty, you know, replacement parts, that kind of thing. No real issues there. So Horizon Hobby is really good. Maintenance is really good. The only downside is that it can be difficult to get parts right now here in 2020. Obviously, all RC stuff, you know, is a little bit difficult to get stuff right now because, you know, everyone's sort of stuck at home driving RC cars. So things are out of stock. I think that's a little bit of a downside. I do think they've made improvements in that area. Arrma stuff in the past has been, sort of poor, I would say, about supplying spare parts, but they have made improvements in there, and I think Horizon Hobby does help that. The other area I would say is that Arrma is actually one of the better supported brands online. So Jason Dearden, who is the CEO or president of the company, he personally actually will provide information, do interviews, give some suggestions, all that kind of thing online. So it is nice to see that their online presence is certainly one of the better ones out there. So in the support and maintenance category, I'm going to give it an above average score. I'm going to give it 4 stars. I don't think it's the best. I do think it's above average and a little bit easier to work on and get parts for this than most other brands. But there are certainly other people out there like Traxxas that I think do a little bit better job. And the last category is value. So the Arrma Kraton EXB sells for $480 here in the United States. That is a roller only, so you're going to have to spend at least $200, $300, $400 worth of electronics to get this thing up and running. And so that is going to be a little bit on the pricey side once you have this thing ready to run. Now, they did make a ton of improvements. They basically improved all the durability stuff that people were asking for. The heavy duty chassis, the aluminum bracing, the beefier arms, heavy duty turnbuckles, and then things maybe people weren't asking for, like the limited slip differential. So overall, I think there's a lot of value in this actual vehicle. Now, competitors to this are going to be the Red Cat Kaiju, which I think sells for $400, the Team Corrali Kronos, which I think sells for $500 ready to run, and then the E-Revo, which I think sells for like $600. So this is kind of fairly priced, I would say. Certainly better deals out there. Something like the Red Cat Kaiju with metal drive shaft, 6S power, ready to run. It's kind of crazy how much they packed into that thing for $400. But I think it's a fair value for this vehicle. I am glad to see that they made this a roller, kind of brought something out for the people that want to put in their own electronics and kind of configure it how they want. And I think they addressed mostly what everybody was looking for. So in the value category, I'm going to give it an average score. I think it's fair, 3 stars. It's not the smashing good deal. I think the RTR is definitely is going to be a little bit pricey once you add all the electronics, but I think it's worth it and a pretty fair value. Okay, so my final thoughts on the Arrma Kraton EXB. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the vehicle. There were some problems with the shimming, you definitely want to check out, but other than that, I think the design is really good. I think the durability improvements they made are really, really good. Have no problems with everything they improved on the vehicle, but I did have problems with all the pre-existing plastic stuff, like, basically the plastic knuckles, the pillow balls were popping out. Broke the turnbuckles, broke the bulkhead. Those are all plastic parts that are carryovers from the V4. So I was kind of surprised that they did not improve those, but I guess, they sort of had to pick and choose their battles. Now, in the durability department, I do think this is pretty much the most durable 6S 1/8 scale monster truck out there, but it's not the most durable vehicle I've ever owned. I think that would pretty much go to the Traxxas Max. I'm just shocked at how much abuse that thing can take. I don't think this is as durable as that, so it kind of depends what you're looking for. Obviously you can strap in more power into this thing. Some guys are running 5th or 6th scale power plants, massive motors, 8S, whatever. But even on sort of stock power, for me, it was not like crazy durable. So I was a little surprised with that. Overall, I'm going to give the vehicle 4 stars. I think it's a good vehicle. Definitely if you're looking for an 8th scale 6S truggy, this is the one I would pick. Everything else out there, I think could use some improvements. They're still sort of on their first generation V1 type vehicles, whereas this thing has been around for 4 or 5 years. And in my opinion, this is pretty much a V5. I mean, they redesigned about 50-60% of the parts on this thing. So I'd be curious to whether they actually come out with a V5 based on this, or they just kind of maintain things as is. So yeah, that's pretty much it. My review of the Arrma Kraton EXB. I hope you enjoyed this video. Definitely like, share, subscribe, hit the add notifications button. Look for more videos soon. Thanks for watching.